What would you say if I asked you, what makes a recipe Scottish? Do all the ingredients need to be from here? Or does it need to have been invented in Scotland? How many generations need to eat it before we can say that it's ours? I want to answer the question, what is Scottish food? And this series will start at the beginning, family recipes. I want to find out about the food I grew up eating and what the stories behind their recipes can teach me. For me, baking begins with scones. It's the first thing that I learned to bake, and frankly, scones are a great topic to start with when we're investigating Scottish food. From a historical perspective, what we do know is that the first time the name scone was recorded in reference to a baked good, it was in 1513 by a Scottish bishop. By no means can Scotland take credit for its invention. It's the result of centuries of peasants baking over open fires, passing down lessons over generations, long before recipes and cookbooks. I have a lot of cookbooks in my collection, but there's only one I would grab in a fire. It's this little red index book, and it belonged to my mum and her mother before her, Granny Bell. It is filled with recipes from family and friends. The instructions are minimal, weights are in ounces, and every single recipe seems to call for lard or margarine. There is, however, a recipe for sultana scones that I haven't made in quite a few years. Preheat your oven to 220 degrees or 200 in a fan assisted oven. Combine 8 ounces of self-raising flour with 1 ounce of sugar, whisk to combine and add 2 ounces of good quality margarine. Rub the marg into the flour with your fingertips until you have fine breadcrumbs with no big lumps. Add 1 ounce of sultanas and turn in the flour, mixing to ensure that they are evenly distributed throughout the dough. Make a well in the centre and add 1 cup of cold milk. Mix briefly and turn onto a floured work surface. Turn the dough onto itself a couple of times and using the back of your fingers bring the dough together. Punch the scones out using a fluted cutter and place on a lined baking sheet. Brush the tops with a little milk and then put them in the oven for 10 minutes. Pull from the oven when they are golden brown. You should really allow them to cool, but not too long. I hope Granny Bell would have approved of them, although I never actually got to meet her. I've never actually asked my mum about how she inherited this book, so I'm going to give her a ring and find out a little more. So I'm assuming your mum was quite a baker?
Oh, she used to bake endlessly. I mean, great, it was like a bakery, and she used to turn her hand to so many things, and when I look back at it, she really did. But she used to make it for like night shifts. She was not on night shifts, and she would make all these baked goods. But she was taking them to give to someone. As I say, it was a sailor worker. It was obviously working in the hospital and making sure that everybody had something for a cup of tea. So I think she was taking it in. She worked in is it the Gin ward and elderly, and so she just used to take things in with her at night that somebody would have a wee cup of tea with. And I suppose I had grown up watching my mum make mince and totties and mince pie, puff pastry, Bell's puff pastry, and obviously her sole use of OXO cubes. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like I suppose I didn't realise how much I probably absorbed just by being in and around her when she was making. So I really just kind of continued that.
So in terms of learning to bake, were you taught by your mum or your gran? Was there a process of learning, or when did you learn to bake?
I actually learned to bake when I got married. There was a lot of people get married all round about the same time, and so there was all these people learning how to cook. And then Mrs. G was doing some cooking classes in the church, and I came across this wine-coloured notebook, and when I opened it I realised, of course, this was the recipe book. I remember writing down the recipe that now this book was here and I was going to make that my recipe book, so that's why I started writing in some of the recipes that I had tried and that I had found had worked. And obviously Mrs. G was just like, this was the woman who knew how to cook, how to clean. She was like the epitome of a good Christian woman. And I married her son.
So my mum learned to bake from my dad's mum, Granny G, short for Granny Gilchrist. This explains why Gilchrist scones made their way into my mum's cookbook. Granny G taught me to bake these very scones on one Saturday morning in 1998. To a large bowl, add 8 ounces of flour with 2 ounces of sugar, mixing before adding 2 ounces of margarine and rubbing into breadcrumbs. A good way of memorising it is 8, 2 and 2. A Granny G trick is to shake the bowl, bringing any lumps up to the top. Add a cup of chilled milk and combine briefly before turning out on the counter. Bring together quickly and avoiding overworking the dough. Punch out the dough and place on a lined baking sheet. Bake for 10 minutes until golden brown. Now, I'm not going to partake in any conversation about what comes first, jam or cream. Granny G served her scones with ice cold Lurpak from the fridge and her homemade bramble jelly, and frankly, it's glorious. It never really occurred to me to ask my gran how she learned to bake or why she baked scones every Saturday morning. And unfortunately, I can't now. I know that she grew up during the war, that she worked in the mills in Paisley when she was 14, and that she married my granddad George after she met him in church. With the recent lift in lockdown, I took the opportunity to go up to my auntie's garden in Foxbar, along with my dad, to look through some pictures and find out a bit more about Granny G. I started off by asking the obvious. Where do Gilchrist scones actually come from?
As far as I know, it was Isa. So it was the first thing when she got married. Isa showed her how to do it.
How to bake. I think it does seem to be like a wartime recipe. But although it has self-raising flour, even most scone recipes will have had an extra teaspoon of baking soda.
Yeah.
But then as well, marge as well.
Well, butter was a bit expensive. That was a luxury.
I'm assuming rationing was still in it.
Well, that's right. I mean, they were still trying to get over the war because it was 48, wasn't it? She was married. Yeah, her dad died when she was only 13. So when she came to 14, the next day she was, or the Monday she was working.
She was a bobbin girl or something, wasn't she?
I mean, she could earn more than Dad.
What mill was it she worked in?
Ferguson mill.
Was it Ferguson?
Yeah. The day she got married, she left her job. You just didn't work when you got married. You were, you looked after the house and had a family and looked after the kids. When we were growing up, she baked every weekend. Years ago, I know my mum's mum, her house, I remember Mum saying the house was never empty. She always had folk up, sort of fellowshipping.
Yeah.
And my mum was the same, didn't she? She always had folk up.
After baking both these scones and listening to the stories behind the recipes, all I'm really thinking about is actually how different my life is from both my grands, and why we bake is so different. My Granny Belle, she baked for her community, and her community was other night shift workers at the hospital. She tried to make things that would keep people going. And then on the other hand, we have Granny G. She baked the same thing at the same time every week. But she did that because that's what her community needed. She had a church who could turn up at her door at any moment, and she wanted to be ready, because that's how she was of service. And she passed it on to everyone else in her community, like teaching my mum how to bake when she got married, just like she had been taught when she got married by Mrs. Shaw. Now, baking for me is something very different. I didn't grow up during the war, and I have access to more ingredients than my grands probably thought possible in their lifetime. And my community is different. My community is filled with friendships, with busy people, and when we're going to try and find time to get together and I get to bake for them, it has to be something special. It has to be something that makes it an event. So my scones will be a little different. Like Granny Bell and Granny G, start with 8 ounces of self-raising flour, but this time add half a teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda. Add 1 teaspoon of salt before whisking and rubbing in 2 ounces of butter. Grate into the bowl 1 ounce of fresh Parmesan cheese and about a tablespoon of black pepper. Stir to combine and make a well in the centre. Add half a cup of milk and half a cup of buttermilk, stirring briefly before turning out onto a floured surface. Punch out the scones and place on a lined baking sheet. Brush with milk and top with poppy seeds and black pepper. Bake in the oven for 10 minutes until golden brown. I think these scones would be perfect for brunch with big groups. Use them instead of bagels or bread, and top them with whatever's in season at the farmer's market. You could do tomato chutney and haggis, or a wild garlic pesto with soft boiled duck eggs. You could try salmon roe or some fancy black pudding. Or just do whatever makes it special for your community. If there's one thing that I've learned after diving into the stories behind the recipes I've been baking for 20 years, it's that ingredients and instructions are obviously vital, but when we pass down recipes, we need to find a way of saving their stories. You won't always have the opportunity to ask someone about their food memories, and being able to hold on to their stories is what keeps recipes alive. You can find all the recipes from this video on tenementkitchen.com. If you want to see the rest of the series, please follow, like and subscribe.